In the quietude of a world that had long forgotten the sound of his voice, Elijah walked. The wind, his only companion, whispered through the desolate landscape, carrying with it the weight of solitude. The sun, a distant, indifferent eye, cast its gaze upon the earth, yet seemed to look right through him. He was the chosen one, or so the prophets had said, but the weight of that title felt more like a millstone around his neck than a crown upon his head. The memories of his calling were as vivid as the day they had been bestowed upon him. The voice like thunder, yet as gentle as a summer breeze, had spoken to him, commanding him to speak truth to power, to challenge the gods of the age. He had obeyed, his heart aflame with righteous fervor, his spirit unyielding in the face of adversity. But now the fire within him had dimmed, reduced to mere embers struggling to stay alight in the relentless storm of indifference. The people once moved by his words now turned away, their eyes downcast, their hearts hardened. The king who had once listened now scoffed, his laughter echoing through the halls of power, a cruel reminder of Elijah's perceived irrelevance. The prophets, his brethren, had been silenced, their voices extinguished like candles in the wind. He was alone, a solitary figure in a world that had turned its back on him. Yet in the depths of his despair, he felt a stirring, a faint echo of that voice that had first called him. It was faint, barely perceptible, yet it was there, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. It spoke not in words, but in feelings and sensations, in the quiet moments between heartbeats. It was a reminder, a whisper of reassurance that he was not alone, that he was not forgotten. For in the grand tapestry of existence, Elijah was but a single thread. Yet his color, his texture, his unique hue was essential to the overall design. His solitude, his struggle, his defiance, they were all part of a greater narrative, a story that was far from over. The voice, the wind, the sun, they were all messengers bearers of a divine urgency, a plea for him to persevere, to endure, to continue his journey. And so Elijah walked on, his heart heavy yet hopeful, his spirit weary yet resolute. For he was the chosen one, not because of the title, not because of the power, but because of the burden, the loneliness, the struggle. And in that struggle, he found his strength, his purpose, his divine connection. He was alone, yet he was not alone. He was ignored, yet he was heard. He was the chosen one, and he would continue to walk, to speak, to bear witness, for that was his destiny, his calling, his urgent message from God. In the quietude of her chamber, the chosen one, Elara, sat by the window, the moon casting a silver glow upon her face. The weight of solitude pressed upon her, a heavy cloak she could not cast aside. The message from the divine had been clear, yet the path ahead was shrouded in a mist of uncertainty. She was alone as the message had foretold, but she was not without purpose. The wind whispered through the trees, a soft, mournful melody that echoed her own heartache. She had been marked, chosen for a task she did not yet understand. The isolation was a crucible, a trial by fire that would temper her spirit and prepare her for the trials to come. Yet the knowledge did little to ease the ache of loneliness that gnawed at her heart. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Elara immersed herself in the ancient texts, seeking solace and guidance in the wisdom of the past. The words of the prophets and seers offered comfort, their own journeys of solitude and purpose resonating with her own. She was not alone in her isolation, for the chosen ones of old had walked this path before her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, a figure appeared at the edge of her village. Tall and cloaked, the stranger carried an air of mystery and a sense of purpose that was unmistakable. Elara felt a tug at her heart, a whisper of recognition that sent a shiver down her spine. The stranger approached her, his eyes reflecting the fading light of the day. "Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "I have been sent to guide you. The time of your trial is at hand." She looked into his eyes, seeing the reflection of her own solitude and purpose. He was a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler on the path of the chosen. Together they would face the trials that lay ahead, their bond forged in the crucible of isolation and tempered by the fire of destiny. The weight of loneliness lifted, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. Elara knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she was no longer alone. She had a companion, a guide, and a friend. Together they would walk the path of the chosen, their steps echoing the footsteps of those who had come before them. The wind whispered through the trees, a soft, hopeful melody that spoke of new beginnings and the promise of dawn. Elara and her companion stood side by side, their eyes fixed on the horizon, ready to face the trials that lay ahead. They were the chosen ones, and their journey had only just begun. In the quietude of a world that had long forgotten the sound of his voice, Elijah wandered the desolate paths of his own making. The wind, a bitter companion, whipped around him, carrying whispers of laughter and warmth from distant villages, places he once called home. Now they were but echoes taunting him with their fleeting presence, only to leave him more alone than before. The weight of his solitude was a physical thing, pressing down on his shoulders, a mantle heavier than any prophet's cloak. The heavens, once a canvas of divine conversation, were now a silent, stony expanse. God's voice, which had once rumbled through the clouds, calling him to greatness, to purpose, was absent. The silence was deafening, a void that echoed with the hollow thuds of Elijah's heart. He was the chosen one, or so he had been told. Yet in this moment he felt anything but. He was a solitary figure, a specter haunting the barren landscapes of his faith. The memories of his past glories were bittersweet, a double-edged sword that cut deep into his soul. He remembered the fire that had once consumed him, the fervor with which he had proclaimed God's word. The people had listened then, their eyes wide with awe and fear. But that was before the silence, before the loneliness, before the doubt had crept in insidious and cold. He had been a prophet, a messenger, a voice in the wilderness. But now he was just a man, lost and alone. The world around him seemed to mock his solitude, the very air thick with the absence of divine presence. He felt ignored, forgotten, a relic of a time when God had spoken freely, when miracles were as common as the sunrise. Yet deep within him, a spark of defiance burned. He refused to accept that this was the end, that his purpose had been fulfilled. He clung to the hope that God's silence was not eternal, that the loneliness was but a temporary state. He was the chosen one after all, and chosen ones had a way of rising from the ashes, their faith forged anew in the fires of adversity. So Elijah walked on his steps, heavy but determined. He carried the weight of his solitude, but he also carried the hope of divine reconnection. For he knew in the depths of his being that God's messages were not always in the thunder and the lightning. Sometimes they were in the silence, in the loneliness, in the quiet moments of waiting and longing. And he was ready to listen, ready to hear the urgent message that God had for him, even in the midst of his aloneness. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her, a physical force that bent her spine and made her breath shallow. She was the chosen one, or so the voice had declared, and yet the loneliness that followed was a vast, echoing chamber, a cavernous space where her footsteps echoed back at her mocking. The walls were cold, unyielding, and she was but a small figure in the vastness, her voice a mere whisper against the silence. She had always known she was different, but to be chosen to be singled out for a purpose unknown was a burden she had not anticipated. The voice had come to her in the dead of night, a thunderous boom that shook the very foundations of her being. It had spoken of great deeds and trials of a destiny woven with threads of gold and shadow. But it had left her with no map, no guide, only a sense of urgency that gnawed at her, a hunger that could not be sated. Days turned into weeks and the loneliness deepened. She found herself retreating from the world, from the mundane chatter and the empty smiles. She could not share her burden, for who would believe her? Who would understand the weight of a God's message, the crushing responsibility of being chosen? She was adrift in a sea of faces, each one a stranger, each one a reminder of her isolation. She wandered the streets, her eyes scanning the crowds, searching for a sign, a beacon to guide her. But there was nothing, only the indifferent hum of life, the relentless march of people going about their days oblivious to her struggle. She felt like a ghost, a specter haunting the edges of their world, unseen and unheard. In her solitude, she turned to the one thing that had always brought her comfort, her art. She poured her loneliness onto the canvas, her brushstrokes a symphony of despair and longing. She painted the voice a swirling mass of light and shadow, a storm-given form. She painted her isolation a vast expanse of emptiness, a void that yawned wide and hungry. And in the center of the void, she painted herself a small figure, her hands outstretched, reaching for something, anything, to pull her from the abyss. One day, as she stood before her latest creation, a figure entered her studio. She turned, her heart pounding, expecting to see a stranger, another face in the endless sea. But the figure was familiar, a face from her past, a friend she had not seen in years. They stood in silence, their eyes locked, and in that moment she felt a spark, a connection that cut through the loneliness, a thread that tied her to the world once more. "Tell me," they said, their voice soft, their eyes filled with an understanding that she had not expected. And so she did. She told them of the voice of the message of the loneliness that had become her constant companion. And as she spoke, she felt the weight lift, if only slightly. She was no longer alone, no longer adrift. She had a guide, a beacon to light her way. Together they stood before the canvas, their eyes tracing the swirls of light and shadow, the vast expanse of emptiness, the small figure in the center. And in that moment, she knew that she was not alone. She was chosen, yes, but she was not alone. She had a friend, a companion on her journey, a light in the darkness. And with that light, she could face whatever trials lay ahead. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her, a physical force that seemed to bend the very air around her. She stood, her bare feet sinking slightly into the plush carpet, and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath her, a tapestry of lights and shadows, a living, breathing entity that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. She felt a pang of longing, a desire to be part of that rhythm, to be one of the many instead of the one. The message had come to her in the dead of night, as it often did. A voice not quite audible, not quite a thought, but something in between had whispered to her, had chosen her. She was the chosen one, the vessel of God's urgent message. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had been given a purpose, a reason for her existence, but with it came a loneliness that was as vast as the night sky. She turned away from the window, her reflection in the glass a ghostly figure, a specter of the life she once led. She had been ordinary once, a girl among girls, a face in the crowd, but now she was set apart, marked by a divine purpose that set her apart from the rest. She was no longer one of the many, but the one. The message was clear, urgent. She was to deliver it, to spread the word, to be the voice of God in a world that had turned a deaf ear. But the task was daunting, the responsibility heavy. She felt the weight of it pressing down on her, a physical force that seemed to bend the very air around her. She walked to her desk, the message burning in her mind, a fire that could not be extinguished. She picked up her pen, the instrument of her purpose, and began to write. The words flowed from her, a river of divine inspiration, a testament to her purpose. She wrote through the night, the city outside her window, a silent witness to her task. As the first light of dawn began to creep into the room, she finished. The message was complete, a testament to her purpose, a beacon of hope in a world that had turned away from God. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, a calm that came from knowing she had fulfilled her purpose. But the peace was fleeting, for with the completion of the message came the knowledge of what she must do next. She must deliver it, must spread the word, must be the voice of God in a world that had turned a deaf ear. The task was daunting, the responsibility heavy, but she was ready. She was the chosen one, the vessel of God's urgent message, and she would not falter in her task. She stood, her body aching from the night's work, and walked to the window once more. The city was awake now, the tapestry of lights and shadows replaced by a bustling metropolis, a living, breathing entity that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. She was a part of it now, a part of the rhythm, a part of the many. She was the chosen one, the vessel of God's urgent message, and she would not be ignored. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her, a physical force that bent her spine and made her breath shallow. She was the chosen one, yet the loneliness of this knowledge was a cold, unyielding stone within her chest. The world outside her window continued oblivious, a tapestry of mundane lives woven in ignorance of the divine thread that now bound her. She wandered to the mirror, her reflection a stranger, a vessel for the extraordinary. Her eyes, once ordinary, now held a depth, a spark that hinted at the fire within. She reached out, her fingers trembling, barely brushing the glass. The touch was a spark, a jolt that sent a shiver down her spine. The reflection flickered, a glitch in reality, and for a moment she saw not her own eyes staring back, but something ancient, something vast and knowing. A whisper, a breath against her mind, a voice that was not a voice. You are not alone, child. You are never alone. The words were a balm, a warmth that spread through her, chasing the cold, the loneliness. She closed her eyes, leaning into the sensation, into the presence that filled the room, that filled her. When she opened her eyes again, the room was different. The air shimmered, a heat haze that danced and twisted, forming shapes, figures that were not quite there, shadows that were not shadows. She saw a city vast and ancient, its spires reaching for the heavens. She saw a battlefield, a sea of souls clashing, their cries echoing in the void. She saw a child, eyes wide with wonder, cradling a book that pulsed with light. The visions faded, leaving her breathless, her heart pounding. She reached out her hand, grasping at the air, at the echoes of what she had seen. The message was clear, the purpose undeniable. She was the chosen one, yes, but not for her own sake. She was a tool, a vessel, a spark to ignite the flame. She turned from the mirror, her reflection now her own once more. The room was ordinary again, the air still, the shadows, mere shadows. But she was changed. The loneliness was still there, a cold stone, but it was smaller now, its edges worn. She could carry it, she realized. She could carry it, and she could carry on. She stepped out of her room into the hallway, into the world. The message burned within her, a fire that would not be extinguished. She was ready. She was the chosen one, and she would not fail. The weight of the message pressed upon her shoulders, a burden both sacred and suffocating. She wandered through the crowded streets, the hum of humanity, a distant murmur, her mind a whirlwind of divine whispers and earthly doubts. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that stretched like gnarled fingers across her path. She was a stranger in this world, a chosen one adrift in a sea of oblivious faces. Her name was Ilara, and she had been touched by the hand of God. Not in the gentle, comforting way of a loving father, but with the urgency of a general rallying his troops. The message was clear, resounding in her mind like a clarion call: prepare, for the end is nigh. Yet despite the clarity of the message, she felt a profound loneliness, a chasm of isolation that yawned between her and the rest of humanity. She sought solace in the familiar, her footsteps leading her to the old cathedral that loomed over the city like a silent sentinel. The heavy doors groaned as she pushed them open, the scent of incense and aged wood enveloping her like an old friend. The interior was dim, the stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic patterns of light upon the stone floor. She knelt before the altar, her heart heavy with the weight of her burden. "Lord," she whispered, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness, "why have you chosen me? Why do I feel so alone?" The silence that followed was deafening, a void that seemed to stretch into eternity. She waited, her heart pounding in her chest, but no answer came. The loneliness she felt was a physical ache, a gnawing emptiness that seemed to consume her very soul. She rose, her knees trembling, and turned to leave. As she did, a soft light caught her eye, a faint glow emanating from the confessional booth. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. The booth was old, the wood worn smooth by the passage of time and the touch of countless penitents. She stepped inside, the door creaking softly behind her. "Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I need to confess." The screen that separated them was a barrier, a symbol of the isolation she felt. She could see the faint outline of the priest on the other side, his silhouette a dark shadow against the dim light. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, and began to speak. "I have been chosen," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have been touched by the hand of God, but I feel so alone, so isolated. I don't know what to do." The priest was silent for a moment, his breath the only sound in the dim confessional. Then softly he spoke. "My child," he said, his voice gentle, "you are not alone. God is with you always, and so am I." His words were a balm to her aching soul, a beacon of hope in the darkness. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, a silent testament to the turmoil within her. She took a deep breath, her heart lighter than it had been in days. "Thank you, Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." She rose, her heart lighter, her spirit renewed. As she stepped out of the confessional, she felt a sense of purpose, a determination that had been missing before. She was still chosen, still burdened with the weight of God's message, but she was no longer alone. She stepped out of the cathedral, the sun setting in a blaze of glory. The streets were quieter now, the crowds having dispersed. She walked with a newfound strength, her heart filled with a quiet resolve. She was ready to face whatever lay ahead, for she was chosen and she was not alone. The weight of the world, or at least the weight of this small town, rested heavily on her shoulders. She could feel it, a physical pressure, a constant reminder of the burden she carried. The burden of being chosen, of being different, of being alone. She walked down the familiar streets, her footsteps echoing in the silence, her breath visible in the cold air. The houses she passed were warm and inviting, laughter and chatter spilling out into the night. But she felt no envy, no longing. She was separate, set apart, and she knew it as surely as she knew her own name. She had always been different, even before the dream started. She had always felt a pull, a tugging at the edges of her consciousness, a whisper in the back of her mind. But the dreams had made it undeniable. They came to her in the dead of night, vivid and real, filled with images and symbols she didn't understand. She would wake up gasping, her heart pounding, her sheets tangled around her. And she would know with a certainty that scared her that these were not just dreams. They were messages. At first, she had tried to ignore them, to push them away, to pretend they weren't happening. But they persisted, growing more frequent, more intense. And then one night, she had a dream that changed everything. She was standing in the field, a vast expanse of green stretching out before her. And in the distance, she saw a figure tall and imposing with eyes that burned like fire. He spoke to her, his voice like thunder, and she knew without a doubt that this was God. He told her that she was chosen, that she had a purpose, a destiny, and he gave her a message that she was to deliver to the world. But when she woke up, she was filled with doubt. Who was she to deliver a message from God? She was just a girl, a nobody, a small-town girl with no special skills or talents. She had no idea how to even begin to fulfill this destiny that had been thrust upon her. And so she did nothing. She kept the message to herself, buried it deep inside, hoping it would go away. But it didn't. It festered, growing heavier and heavier with each passing day. She felt it gnawing at her, eating away at her, until she could no longer ignore it. She knew she had to do something to take a step, any step towards fulfilling her destiny. And so she decided to start small. She would start with her town, with the people she knew. She would share the message, not in words, but in actions. She would show them through her kindness, her compassion, her love, that there was more to life than the mundane, the ordinary, the everyday. And so she began. She volunteered at the soup kitchen. She helped the elderly with their groceries. She visited the sick in the hospital. She did everything she could to make a difference, to make the world a better place. And slowly she began to feel the weight on her shoulders lessen. She began to feel a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. She began to feel for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she was meant to be. But even as she felt this sense of purpose growing stronger, she also felt a growing sense of isolation. She was different, set apart, and people noticed. They whispered about her, pointed at her, stared at her. They didn't understand her, and they were afraid of what they didn't understand. And so they shunned her, ostracized her, made her an outcast. She was alone, more alone than she had ever been before. But she didn't let it stop her. She knew that she was chosen, that she had a purpose, and she was determined to see it through. She continued to help, to serve, to love, even as the whispers grew louder, even as the stares grew more intense. She knew that she was on the right path, that she was fulfilling her destiny, and she knew that one day the message she carried would be heard, would be understood, would change the world. And so she walked on her head, held high, her heart filled with love, her spirit unbroken. She was alone, yes, but she was not afraid. She was chosen, and she would not let fear or doubt or loneliness stop her from fulfilling her destiny. She would walk this path no matter where it led, no matter what it cost. She would walk it because she had to, because she was chosen, because she was the one. The weight of the message pressed upon his shoulders, heavy as the stone tablets Moses once carried. He, a simple man, a nobody in the grand scheme of things, had been chosen to deliver God's urgent message. The revelation had come to him in the quietude of his study, a voice as clear as the church bell on Sunday morning, resonating through his very being. He had been alone, as he often was, the solitude a constant companion in his life. But now the loneliness felt different, laced with a sense of purpose, a divine mission. He looked around his modest home, the walls adorned with books and the faint scent of aged paper lingering in the air. His wife, unaware of the divine intervention, bustled about the kitchen, her laughter echoing softly. He envied her simplicity, her ability to find joy in the mundane. He, on the other hand, was now burdened with a knowledge that set him apart, a knowledge that made him feel even more isolated than before. The message was clear, urgent. God was displeased with the path humanity was treading. The chosen one, he realized with a start, was not just him, but all of humanity. They were the chosen ones, the ones who had been given the gift of free will, the ones who had the power to shape their own destiny. But they were squandering it, lost in their own selfish pursuits, oblivious to the divine plan. He felt a pang of sorrow, a deep sense of loss. He wanted to share the message, to shout it from the rooftops, to make them understand. But he knew it was not his place. He was merely the messenger, the one who had been entrusted with the divine secret. The rest was up to them, up to humanity, to heed the call to change their ways. He walked to the window, his gaze sweeping over the quiet neighborhood. The world outside seemed so ordinary, so mundane. But he knew better. He knew the truth, the divine plan. And he knew that he was alone in this knowledge, a lonely sentinel in the night, watching, waiting, hoping. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, a heavy cloak that weighed him down. But he knew he had to bear it, to carry the burden, to fulfill his divine mission. He was the chosen one, the one who had been entrusted with God's urgent message. And he would not fail. He could not fail. For the fate of humanity rested in his hands. The weight of the message pressed upon his shoulders, a burden he had not anticipated when he first felt the call. The world around him seemed to blur, the faces of his friends and family, now distant. their voices muffled as if heard through a thick fog. He was alone not in the physical sense, but in the profound isolation of his purpose. The chosen one, they had called him, but now in this moment of revelation, he understood the true meaning of those words. He was set apart, marked by a divine hand, and the path before him was one he must walk alone. The message was clear, urgent, and it burned within him like a wildfire. It was a call to action, a summons to rise and fulfill the destiny that had been laid out for him before he was even born. But with this clarity came a profound sense of solitude. The people around him, even those he loved the most, could not understand the depth of his calling. They saw only the surface, the ordinary man they had always known, and not the vessel of divine purpose that he had become. He wandered through the streets of his hometown, the familiar sights and sounds now alien to him. The laughter of children playing in the park, the chatter of neighbors in the market, the hum of daily life. All of it seemed to exist in a different realm, one to which he no longer belonged. He was a stranger in his own world, a specter walking among the living, unseen and unheard. His heart ached with the weight of his isolation. He longed for someone to understand, to share the burden of his calling, but he knew that such a companion was not meant for him. The path of the chosen one was a solitary one, a journey that could only be undertaken alone. He was the messenger, the bearer of God's urgent message, and the responsibility was his alone to bear. Yet in the depths of his solitude, he found a strange comfort. He was not alone in the truest sense, for he carried within him the presence of the divine. The message that burned within him was a beacon, a light that guided him through the darkness of his isolation. He was chosen, and in that choice he found a purpose that transcended the ordinary, a purpose that gave meaning to his solitude. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, with moments of doubt and despair. But he also knew that he was not alone in his journey. The divine presence that had called him, that had marked him as the chosen one, would be with him every step of the way. And in that knowledge, he found the strength to continue to walk the path that had been laid out for him, to fulfill the destiny that was his alone to embrace. As he stood at the edge of the town, looking out at the vast expanse of the unknown, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He was ready to embrace his solitude, ready to bear the burden of his calling, ready to walk the path of the chosen one. And with that readiness, he took his first step into the unknown, into the journey that would define his life, into the destiny that was his alone to fulfill. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her, a physical force that seemed to bend the very air around her. She stood by the window, her fingers tracing the cold glass. The world outside a blur of colors and movement, a world that now felt alien, distant. The words echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat. You are the chosen one. You are not alone, but you must walk this path alone. A tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent testament to her turmoil. She had always known she was different, but this was a revelation that shattered her world and remade it in an instant. The loneliness she had felt, the isolation, it was not a mere feeling, but a prophecy, a destiny. She was the chosen one, and with that title came a solitude as vast and unyielding as the night sky. She turned away from the window, her resolve hardening like steel. If this was her path, then she would walk it, no matter how arduous, no matter how lonely. She would not falter, not break. She was the chosen one, and she would bear the weight of that title with grace and strength. In the days that followed, she began to see the world with new eyes. The people around her, their lives intertwined with hers, were now threads in a vast tapestry, each one vital, each one beautiful. She saw their struggles, their joys, their sorrows, and she understood that her path was not one of isolation, but of connection. She was the chosen one, but she was not alone. She was a part of something greater, something vast and wondrous. And so she walked her path, her heart heavy with the weight of her destiny, but her spirit unbowed. She was the chosen one, and she would not falter. She would walk her path, and she would do so with courage, with love, and with hope. For she was not alone, and neither was she ignored. She was the chosen one, and her journey had only just begun. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. The chosen one she had been called, and yet the loneliness was a tangible thing, a shroud that clung to her despite the divine purpose. She traced the edges of the ancient text, the ink long since dried, but the words as vibrant as the day they were inscribed. The room was a sanctuary, a place where the outside world's cacophony was muted, allowing her to focus on the task at hand. The message was clear, urgent even, but the path to deliver it was shrouded in uncertainty. She was to find the ones who had strayed, those who had forgotten the old ways and turned their backs on the divine. But how does one find those who do not wish to be found? The question gnawed at her, a persistent itch that she could not scratch. She rose from her chair, the wooden legs scraping against the stone floor, and walked to the window. The world outside was a blur of colors and movement, a tapestry of life that seemed to go on oblivious to the divine plan. She felt a pang of envy, a fleeting wish to be a part of that oblivion. But the message burned within her, a beacon that guided her, a burden that she could not shake off. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw the door creak open to reveal a young girl, her eyes wide with curiosity. "They're asking for you," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The council is ready to hear your message." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The council was a formidable group, their minds as sharp as their tongues. But she knew that she had to try, had to deliver the message that had been entrusted to her. She nodded at the girl a silent acknowledgement and walked out of the room, her steps echoing in the empty hallway. The council chamber was a grand room, its high ceilings adorned with intricate carvings that spoke of a time long past. The members of the council sat in a semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She took her place in the center, the weight of their gazes pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, the words of the message rising to her lips, and began to speak. Her voice echoed in the chamber, a beacon of truth in a world that had forgotten the old ways. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. The chosen one she had been called, and yet the solitude was suffocating. The walls, once familiar, now seemed to echo with an emptiness that resonated within her. She walked to the window, the cold glass a stark contrast to the warmth of her breath. Outside, the world moved on, oblivious to the burden she carried. The message had come to her in the quiet hours of the night, a whisper in the dark that had grown into a roar. It was a call to action, a plea for help from a force beyond her comprehension. She had been chosen and singled out from the masses, and yet the isolation was overwhelming. She felt like a beacon in the night, shining brightly but alone, her light unseen by those who needed it most. She turned away from the window, her reflection in the glass, a ghostly figure, a reminder of the solitude that enveloped her. The message was clear, the task daunting. She was to guide, to lead, to show the way to those who had lost their path. But how could she do that when she felt so alone, so ignored? She sat at her desk, the weight of the world pressing down upon her. The paper before her was blank, a stark contrast to the thoughts that swirled in her mind. She picked up her pen, the instrument of her calling, and began to write. The words flowed from her, a river of thought that spilled onto the page. She wrote of the message, of the call to action, of the loneliness that came with being chosen. As she wrote, she felt a shift within her. The loneliness did not disappear, but it became bearable, a companion rather than a burden. She realized that she was not alone in her solitude. There were others like her chosen one who carried the weight of the world on their shoulders. They were scattered across the globe, each one a beacon in the night, guiding the lost and the lonely. She finished her letter, the words a testament to her journey. She folded it carefully, sealing it with a kiss. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the path would be fraught with challenges. But she also knew that she was not alone. She was part of something greater, something that transcended the boundaries of the physical world. She stood her resolve, strengthened her purpose clear. She was the chosen one, and she would not let the loneliness consume her. She would shine her light, guiding those who needed it, and in doing so, she would find her way back from the solitude that had once threatened to engulf her. The message was urgent, the task daunting, but she was ready. She was the chosen one, and she would not fail. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. She traced the edges of the parchment, the words etched into her mind, a beacon of purpose in the vast sea of her solitude. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like the walls of a fortress, isolating her from the world outside. She was the chosen one, yet the irony of her isolation was not lost on her. The very purpose that set her apart was the same that distanced her from the ordinary lives of those around her. She wandered to the window, the cold glass a stark contrast to the warmth of her breath. Outside, the world moved in its usual rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing within her. The trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The street below was a dance of life, people moving to and fro, each engrossed in their own world, their own purpose. She longed to be a part of it, to be one of them, to be ordinary. But she was not ordinary. She was the chosen one. The message burned within her, a fire that could not be extinguished. It was a call to action, a summons to a destiny she was not sure she was ready for. The weight of it was immense, a burden she was not sure she could bear. Yet she knew she had no choice. She was the chosen one, and with that came a responsibility she could not shirk. She turned away from the window, her resolve hardening. She would not let the fear of the unknown paralyze her. She would face her destiny head-on, no matter how daunting it was. She was the chosen one, and she would not let the world or herself forget it. The first step was the hardest. She knew she had to seek out the others, the ones who shared her burden, her purpose. They were out there, she was sure of it. She could feel it in her bones, a pull that guided her, a beacon that called to her. She would find them, and together they would face whatever lay ahead. The journey would not be easy. She knew that. There would be obstacles, challenges, and perhaps even enemies. But she was ready. She was the chosen one, and she would not falter. She would forge ahead no matter what stood in her way. As she stepped out of her room, she felt a sense of determination wash over her. She was no longer just a girl in a room, no longer just a spectator to life. She was the chosen one, and she was ready to embrace her destiny. The world outside was vast and unknown, but she was ready to face it. She was ready to find the others, to find her purpose, to find herself. And so with a deep breath, she stepped forward into the unknown, into her destiny. The journey had begun, and she was ready to see it through no matter what lay ahead. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. The words, though clear, were heavy with a gravity she could not yet comprehend. She was the chosen one, a notion that both terrified and exhilarated her. The loneliness she had felt, the sense of isolation that had wrapped around her like a shroud, now made sense. It was not a mere coincidence, but a deliberate isolation, a preparation for a purpose she was yet to fully grasp. She walked to the window, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. The world outside was bathed in the soft glow of the moon, a world that was both familiar and alien to her now. She felt a pang of longing, a desire to share this revelation with someone, anyone. But she knew she could not. The message was clear. Her path was solitary, at least for now. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak tree in her backyard, a tree that had stood sentinel over her childhood. She remembered the countless hours she had spent beneath its sprawling branches, lost in the pages of a book or the whimsical world of her imagination. It was a world she had always felt a part of, yet never truly belonged to. Now she understood why. She turned away from the window, her eyes scanning the room that had been her sanctuary. The walls, adorned with memories and mementos, now seemed to echo the emptiness she felt inside. She was no longer just a girl in a room. She was the chosen one, a title that carried with it a responsibility she was not yet ready to accept. A soft knock on the door startled her, a reminder of the world she was now separate from. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she could not let anyone in, not yet. She needed time to understand, to prepare. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not feeling well. I think I need to be alone tonight." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words and unasked questions. She could almost feel the concern radiating from the other side of the door, but she steeled herself against it. She was the chosen one, and her path was solitary. She had to be strong, had to be ready. As the footsteps retreated down the hallway, she felt a sense of finality settle over her. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in her life. But she was not afraid. She was the chosen one, and she would face whatever came her way with courage and determination. She would not let the loneliness consume her. She would let it fuel her, let it strengthen her. She walked back to the window, her eyes scanning the night sky. Somewhere out there, she knew her destiny awaited, and she was ready to face it, ready to embrace it. She was the chosen one, and she would not let the world or herself forget it. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. She traced the edges of the parchment, the words etched into her mind, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like the walls of a prison, each brick a whisper of isolation. She was the chosen one, yet the loneliness was a shroud, heavy and suffocating. The world outside her window pulsed with life, oblivious to her burden. Laughter echoed from the streets below, a stark contrast to the silence that enveloped her. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, the condensation from her breath blurring the vibrant scene into a watercolor of indistinct shapes and colors. The disconnect was palpable, a chasm that yawned between her and the world, a void that echoed with the silence of her solitude. She turned away from the window, her gaze falling upon the mirror across the room. The reflection that stared back at her was a stranger eyes wide with a knowledge that set her apart. She was no longer just a girl in a room. She was a vessel, a conduit for a message that burned within her. The weight of it was immense, a fire that threatened to consume her from within. She clutched the parchment to her chest, the words a lifeline in the storm of her isolation. She was alone, yes, but she was not abandoned. The message was clear, a beacon in the night, a testament to her purpose. She was the chosen one, and though the path was steeped in solitude, she would walk it one step at a time until the message was delivered, until the silence was broken, until the world knew the truth that burned within her. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. The chosen one, they had called her, but the title felt hollow, a gourd rattling with emptiness. She traced the edges of the ancient parchment, the ink smudged with time, yet the words clear, urgent. "You are not alone," it had said, but the solitude was a tangible thing, a shroud wrapped tight around her shoulders. The city beyond her window pulsed with life, a stark contrast to the stillness within her. She watched as people moved in and out of the cathedral, their faces etched with devotion, their voices raised in hymns that did not reach her. She was a specter in their midst, unseen, unheard. The message had promised otherwise, but promises were like the wind, shifting, elusive. She turned from the window, her gaze falling upon the mirror. The reflection staring back was a stranger eyes wide with a knowledge too vast to bear. She was a vessel, they had set, a conduit for divine will. But the divine was silent, and she was a cup overflowing with unspoken words. A knock at the door startled her. She turned, heart pounding, expecting an angel assign something. But it was only the maid, her face a mask of concern. "Are you well, my lady?" she asked, her voice soft, human. The chosen one opened her mouth, but no words came. The maid's brow furrowed, and she stepped closer, her hand reaching out, then retreating, unsure. In that moment, the chosen one felt a spark of connection. It was not the divine, not the grand, all-consuming presence she had expected. It was something smaller, quieter, but no less profound. She reached out her hand, meeting the maid's. The touch was warm, grounding. "I am well," she said, and for the first time in a long while, she believed it. The message had been clear, but perhaps she had misunderstood. She was not alone, not in the way she had thought. The divine was not in the grand gestures, the thunderous voices. It was in the quiet moments, the gentle touches, the unspoken understandings. She was the chosen one, but she was also just a woman standing in a room holding the hand of another. And perhaps in the end, that was enough. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. She traced the edges of the ancient parchment, the ink smudged from her tears, her fingers trembling with the gravity of the words inscribed. Chosen one, they had called her, and yet the loneliness was a vast, echoing chamber within her. The world outside her window continued its ceaseless hum, oblivious to the burden she carried. She rose, the parchment clutched tightly in her hand, and stepped out into the garden. The moon cast long, silvered fingers of light through the leaves, dappling the path before her. She walked, her bare feet silent on the cool grass, her breath misting in the night air. The garden was her sanctuary, a place where she could think, where she could feel the presence of something greater, something that understood her solitude. A rustle in the bushes made her pause. She turned, her heart pounding, and saw a pair of eyes reflecting the moonlight. A fox, its fur, a blend of autumn hues, watched her from the shadows. It stepped forward, cautious, its gaze never leaving hers. She held out her hand, the parchment still clutched in her fingers, and the fox approached, its nose twitching. It sniffed at the parchment, then at her hand, before sitting back on its haunches, its tail curled around its body. She smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips. "Do you understand, little one?" she whispered. "Do you know what it means to be chosen?" The fox tilted its head, its ears twitching, and she laughed softly, the sound echoing through the garden. "I suppose not. You are free, aren't you? Free to roam, to hunt, to live your life as you please." The fox stood, its gaze still fixed on her, before it turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone once more. She sighed, looking down at the parchment in her hand. The words swam before her eyes, the ink blurring as tears welled up once more. She was the chosen one, yet she had never felt more alone. A breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a whisper, a promise. She looked up, her tears drying on her cheeks, and saw the stars above, their light twinkling like 1,000 promises. She took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. She was alone, yes, but she was not without purpose. She was the chosen one, and she would fulfill her destiny, no matter the cost. She turned her steps lighter now and walked back to her room. The world outside her window still hummed, still turned, still lived, and she, the chosen one, would be a part of it, would shape it, would change it. She would not let her loneliness define her. She would let her purpose guide her. And so, with the parchment clutched tightly in her hand, she stepped forward into her destiny, into her future, into her life as the chosen one. In the quietude of her chamber, the chosen one, Alara, sat by the window, the moon casting a silver glow upon her face. The weight of isolation pressed heavily upon her shoulders, a burden she had carried since the day the divine whisper had first touched her ear. The world outside was a symphony of life, yet she was a solitary note, discordant and unheard. The message from the heavens burned within her, a fire that both warmed and scorched, a secret that yearned to be shared, yet remained unspoken. The wind whispered through the trees, a soft, mournful lullaby that echoed her solitude. She could feel the presence of the divine, a gentle hum in the air, a soft glow in the darkness. Yet it was a presence that only she could perceive, a connection that only she could feel. It was a lonely gift, this divine communion, a bridge that spanned the chasm between the mortal and the eternal, but one that she had to cross alone. The message was urgent, a call to action that resonated within her very soul. It was a plea for unity, a warning of discord, a vision of a world torn asunder by strife and division. She saw it all in her dreams, in the quiet moments of reflection, in the silent spaces between her heartbeats. It was a vision that she desperately wanted to share, a warning that she yearned to deliver. Yet she was bound by the weight of her solitude, a chosen one, crying out in the wilderness, her voice echoing unheard. She looked down at her hands, the hands of a healer, a guide, a leader. They were hands that could mend, could create, could inspire. Yet they were also the hands of a prisoner bound by the chains of her isolation. She longed to reach out, to touch, to connect. But the path of the chosen one was a lonely one, a journey that she had to undertake alone. In the distance, the first light of dawn began to break, a soft golden glow that heralded the arrival of a new day. Alara took a deep breath, the weight of her solitude still heavy upon her shoulders. Yet there was a fire within her, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. She was the chosen one, a voice crying out in the wilderness, and she would not be silenced. In the quietude of her chamber, the chosen one, Alara, sat by the window, the moon casting a silver glow upon her parchment. The words she had written earlier, the urgent message from the divine, seemed to shimmer under the lunar light, as if imbued with an otherworldly energy. She felt a profound sense of solitude, a chasm of isolation that yawned wide and deep within her. The weight of the message, the gravity of her role pressed upon her shoulders, a burden she bore alone. The castle slumbered around her, the stone walls and ancient timbers, silent witnesses to her vigil. The world outside her window was a tapestry of shadows and silver, the trees whispering secrets in the night breeze. She was the chosen one, yet she felt invisible, her presence as insubstantial as the moonlight that bathed her. The irony was not lost on her. She, who was meant to deliver a message of divine importance, felt utterly ignored. Her voice, a whisper, lost in the wind. A soft knock at her door stirred her from her reverie. She turned, her heart quickening, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Perhaps she was not as alone as she felt. "Enter," she called, her voice steady, despite the tumult within her. The door creaked open, revealing a young squire, his face flushed with exertion. He bowed deeply, his eyes never leaving the floor. "My lady," he panted, "I bring tidings. A rider approaches his banner, bearing the sigil of the High King." Alara's heart leapt into her throat. The High King, the most powerful ruler in the land, was coming to her. She felt a surge of hope, a warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the cold loneliness. Perhaps this was the beginning of the end of her isolation. Perhaps this was the moment when her message would be heard, when her role as the chosen one would be acknowledged. She rose, her movements swift and sure, her earlier melancholy forgotten in the face of this new development. She descended the spiral staircase, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. The castle was stirring around her, servants and soldiers rousing from their slumber, their eyes wide with curiosity and anticipation. As she stepped out into the courtyard, the cold night air bit at her skin. She barely noticed, her eyes fixed on the figure approaching on horseback. The rider dismounted, his armor gleaming under the moonlight. He bowed deeply, his voice echoing in the silent courtyard. "My lady," he said, "the High King sends his regards. He has received your message and requests your presence at his court." Alara felt a surge of triumph, a sense of vindication that warmed her from within. She was no longer alone, no longer ignored. Her message had been heard, her role acknowledged. She was the chosen one, and the world was ready to listen. In the quietude of her room, the weight of the message pressed upon her. The chosen one she had been called, and yet the loneliness was a vast, echoing chamber within her. The world outside hummed with indifference, oblivious to the burden she carried. She traced the edges of the ancient parchment, the ink smudged with time, the words etched into her very being. "You are not alone," it had said. Yet the solitude was a tangible thing, wrapping around her like a shroud. She wandered to the window, the night sky, a vast expanse of stars, each a distant sun, each a world untouched by her plight. The moon, a silent sentinel, cast its pallid light upon the earth, illuminating the path she was destined to tread. The message had spoken of trials and tribulations, of a journey fraught with peril and purpose. But in the quiet of the night, the purpose seemed elusive, the path shrouded in mist. A rustle in the bushes below her window stirred her from her reverie. She peered into the darkness, her heart pounding a staccato rhythm against her ribs. A figure emerged, cloaked in shadows, the moonlight catching the glint of steel at his hip. Her breath hitched, a gasp caught in her throat. The figure looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and in that moment she knew. This was the beginning, the first trial, the first test of her resolve. He moved with the grace of a predator, his steps silent on the dew-kissed grass. She watched, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. As he reached the base of her window, he looked up once more, his eyes reflecting the moonlight, his expression inscrutable. "I have been sent," he said, his voice a low rumble, "to guide you on your path." She hesitated, the message's words echoing in her mind. "Trust in those who come to you in the night, for they are the harbingers of your destiny." She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the latch of the window. The night air rushed in, cool and damp, carrying with it the scent of earth and something metallic, something ancient. He climbed through the window, his movements fluid and precise. Up close, she could see the lines etched into his face, the scars that spoke of battles fought and won. His eyes, dark and piercing, held a depth of knowledge, a wisdom that belied his years. "The time has come," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The world is not ready for what is to come, but you are. You are the chosen one." She felt the weight of his words, the truth of them, settling into her bones. The loneliness, the isolation, it was all part of the journey. She was not ignored, not forgotten. She was prepared. The message had been clear, the path laid out before her. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening like steel. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steady, her eyes meeting his. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You must listen," he said. "You must learn. And when the time is right, you must act." He reached into his cloak, withdrawing a small leather-bound book. "This will guide you," he said, pressing it into her hands. "It holds the knowledge of the ancients, the wisdom of the ages. Study it well, for it will be your compass in the days to come." She took the book, her fingers tracing the worn leather, the embossed symbols that spoke of a language long forgotten. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with wonder and determination. "I will not fail," she said, her voice a vow, a promise to herself and to the world. He nodded, his eyes reflecting a pride that warmed her heart. "I know," he said. "Now rest. The journey ahead is long and fraught with peril. You will need your strength." He turned to leave, his form melting into the shadows. She watched him go, her heart a steady beat of resolve. The loneliness was still there, a constant companion, but it was tempered now, tempered by purpose and the knowledge that she was not alone. She was the chosen one, and the world would soon know her name. She turned back to the room, the book clutched tightly in her hands, the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. The journey had begun, and she was ready. In the quietude of her room, Eleanor sat cross-legged on the floor, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The message was clear, the vision undeniable, yet the path ahead was shrouded in a fog of uncertainty. She was chosen, or so the voice had whispered in the stillness of the night. But chosen for what she could not yet discern. The loneliness was a physical ache, a hollow pit in her stomach that gnawed at her relentlessly. She felt like a solitary tree in a vast, barren landscape, her branches reaching out, desperate for connection, for understanding. The days blurred into one another, a monotonous dance of mundane tasks and fleeting interactions. She moved through her life like a ghost, unseen and unheard, her secret burning brightly within her. She longed to share her burden, to unload the weight of her calling, but the words lodged in her throat, choked by fear and disbelief. Who would believe her? Who could understand the magnitude of her revelation? In the solitude of her room, she sought solace in the pages of ancient texts, her fingers tracing the worn edges of parchment and leather. She searched for answers, for guidance, for any shred of evidence that she was not alone in her journey. The words of prophets and seers offered some comfort, their stories echoing her own, yet the loneliness persisted, a constant companion that refused to be shaken off. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the room, Eleanor felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to venture out. The city was alive with the hum of evening activity, the streets teeming with people going about their lives, oblivious to the turmoil within her. She walked aimlessly, her feet carrying her through the familiar labyrinth of streets, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. As she turned a corner, she found herself standing before an old weathered church. The building was unassuming, its stone facade worn smooth by time and the elements. Yet there was something about it that drew her in a magnetic pull that she could not resist. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside the cool, quiet interior, enveloping her like a comforting embrace. The church was empty, the pews silent and still. Eleanor walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the hushed space. She knelt before the altar, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes closed in prayer. In the silence, she poured out her heart, her fears, her doubts, her longing for connection and understanding. As she prayed, she felt a sudden warm presence beside her. She opened her eyes to find an elderly woman sitting in the pew next to her, her eyes kind and understanding. "You are not alone, child," the woman said, her voice soft and gentle. "The path you walk is a difficult one, but you are never truly alone. God is with you always." Eleanor felt a surge of emotion, tears welling up in her eyes. She reached out, taking the woman's hand in hers, grateful for the connection, for the understanding. In that moment, the loneliness that had plagued her for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of peace and belonging. The woman introduced herself as Martha, a woman of faith who had walked her own path of solitude and struggle. She listened as Eleanor shared her story, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's face, her presence a steady, comforting force. Together they prayed, their voices blending in a harmonious chorus of faith and hope. As Eleanor left the church that evening, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a spark of light in the darkness. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she had allies and guides to help her on her journey. In the days that followed, Eleanor reached out to others, sharing her story, her faith, her hope. She found a community of like-minded individuals, people who understood her struggle and supported her in her journey. Together, they formed a network of faith and support, a beacon of light in the darkness. Eleanor's loneliness began to fade, replaced by a sense of connection and belonging. She was no longer a solitary tree in a barren landscape, but a part of a vast, thriving forest, her branches intertwined with those of her fellow travelers. She was chosen, yes, but she was not alone. And with that knowledge, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the quietude of the night, the weight of the world pressed heavily upon his shoulders, a burden he had carried since the day the voice first whispered to him. He was the chosen one, or so they said, but the path was lonely, a solitary journey through a wilderness of doubt and despair. The voice had promised him, purpose had filled him with a fire that burned brightly, yet now it seemed to have abandoned him, leaving him to stumble in the dark. He stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind howling around him, a symphony of solitude. The stars above were like distant cold eyes, indifferent to his plight. He had felt so alone, so ignored, the weight of his calling, a crushing force that threatened to shatter him. The message he carried, the urgent plea from a God who seemed to have forgotten him, echoed hollowly in his heart. But as he stood there teetering on the precipice, a memory surfaced, a whisper of a promise made long ago. "You are not alone," the voice had said, "for I am with you always, even unto the end of the world." The words were a lifeline, a beacon in the darkness, and he clung to them desperately. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, a testament to his pain, his fear, his longing. But within that tear there was a spark, an ember of hope that refused to be extinguished. He was the chosen one, yes, but he was also human, flawed and fragile, yet capable of such immense strength. With a deep, shuddering breath, he turned away from the cliff, his heart heavy but resolute. The path before him was still uncertain, the journey still fraught with peril, but he would walk it one step at a time. For he was not alone. The God who had chosen him, who had whispered his name in the quiet of the night, was with him still. And so, with a heart filled with renewed purpose, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The message he carried was urgent, yes, but it was also a message of hope, of love, of redemption. And he would deliver it not with the strength of a god, but with the unyielding spirit of a man who had stared into the abyss and chosen to turn away. In that moment, he was no longer alone, no longer ignored. He was the chosen one, and he would fulfill his destiny not for the glory, not for the praise, but for the love that had whispered his name and set him on this path. And in that love, he found his strength, his purpose, his peace. The end was not the cliff, not the fall, but the journey, the steps he took, the life he touched, the love he shared. And so he walked on a beacon of hope in the darkness, a testament to the power of love, of faith, of the unyielding human spirit.